It was a beautiful sunny day, and the main character was returning from class with her friend. Suddenly, her friend looked off to the side and asked Juju if that was her older brother standing nearby. He was very handsome, so girls around often paid attention to him. Her friend was sure it was him. Juju looked in the direction her friend pointed and said yes, that was definitely her brother. The guy was staring at something on his phone while Juju's friend sighed dreamily and said her brother was a total hottie. She started begging Juju to introduce them, but Juju really didn't want to. She never understood why girls found her brother attractive and usually tried to pretend they weren't even related when outside. She asked her friend to just leave. She didn't want to talk to her brother. She had enough of that at home. But then her friend noticed someone else, just as good-looking, had joined him. It turned out to be Go Dojin. The girl couldn't believe that two gorgeous guys were standing that close, and Juju still refused to go over. In his suit, Go Dojin looked absolutely incredible. The two guys were tall and handsome like models. Juju's cheeks turned slightly red when she saw her neighbor. If we're talking about Juju's first love, we have to go back to the time when she had just started elementary school. One time, she got scared because someone was standing outside their door, so she ran to tell her brother. Taiu was in the 4th grade back then. His little sister seemed annoying and was interrupting his video games. But she wouldn't leave him alone, begging him to come check the door. She thought it was their new neighbors and was dying to see them. The boy didn't care. That is, until they both froze at the sound of a voice behind the door asking if anyone was home. Little Juju approached the door, cracked it open a little, and shyly asked who it was. And even though she was still a kid, she immediately understood one thing. Some people just look breathtaking. A very handsome guy was standing in front of her, holding a small rice cake and smiling warmly. He asked if her parents were home. Sometimes even the most illogical things can make your heart race. And it's hard to explain those feelings with words. He said he'd just moved into the apartment next door and wanted to greet them with a rice cake. Juju, stunned by his looks, suddenly blurted out that he was very handsome and stared at him with her mouth wide open. That's how her first love became Go Dojin, who seemed like the perfect man to her. But the 8-year age gap was an impossible barrier for them. Now, Go Dojin was a divorced man with a child, and the obstacles were even harder to overcome. Back home, Juju loudly announced that she was back, but she found out her brother hadn't returned yet. Probably out drinking with Go Dojin. Go Dojin, by the way, was Go Dohyuk's younger brother, the same age as Taiu and his close friend. Juju headed to the shower, still thinking about how surprised she was to see Dojin at the department this morning. In that suit, he looked like a gangster. The hot water flowed over her body as Juju admitted that he had become just as handsome as Go Dojin. Or maybe it was just the suit making him look that good? After the shower, she wrapped her hair in a towel, put a patches, and wondered why her brother still wasn't home. It was almost dinner time. She decided to call him and ask when he'd be back. Taiu was surprised and asked why she was even asking. Juju replied that it was already dinner time and she was waiting for him. That annoyed him. After all, he wasn't her personal chef. He told her she could make her own dinner. Juju started whining, and Taiu said she could just come eat at restaurant with them. Hearing that, Juju was surprised and asked if he really meant it. Taiu said of course she could come, especially since Dojan was treating them tonight. Juju was delighted and said she'd get ready right away and join them. A bit later, Go Dojin asked why Juju had suddenly shown up at their table. Taiu calmly answered that he couldn't let the kid go hungry. Juju, meanwhile, smiled happily and kept glancing at Dojin. Dojin sighed and said they were both freeloaders. Taiu didn't mind the teasing and patted his sister's back, telling her to order whatever she wanted. Juju wasn't going to feel shy, so she called the waiter and started listing the dishes she wanted. Noticing Go Dojin's intense gaze, she asked why he was staring at her. Was he worried about the cost? But he smiled and said that wasn't it at all. He looked sinfully attractive in that suit. Resting his chin on his hand, he said he always imagined her as this little girl. When did she grow up enough to be drinking alcohol? Juju blushed a little. She was only 3 years younger than him, so she didn't see much of an age gap. Her eyes lit up at the sight of him in that suit. Why did it stir her imagination like that? She asked him why he was dressed like that. The next moment, Dojin took off his jacket, making Juju gulp. His shoulders looked so broad in that shirt. He said he'd been at his cousin's wedding. Juju thought back to her school days when she only cared about boys' faces. Now, she was completely mesmerized by a broad male chest. She stared as he loosened his tie. The guy noticed and asked if she really liked his suit that much. She couldn't take her eyes off him. Juju got flustered and didn't know how to answer, just kept staring at him. Taiju smiled and said he told his friend that girls love guys in suits. Taiju joked that if he wore a suit to university, all the girls would fall for him, then asked if anyone was planning to get married soon. Dojin teased him, saying he should at least try wearing a suit first. Tired of the conversation, he said, "Forget it, just drink your glass." He was talking to Taiju, but Juju grabbed the glass instead and started drinking in big gulps. Everyone laughed and decided to get drunk together that night. A bit later, the apartment was littered with empty alcohol bottles. Juju was notoriously picky, so it was hard for her to find a guy who met her standards. But right now, it felt like she'd found the ideal of all ideals she could ever meet. Her hands gently rested on the man's chest. Seeing it just once, she realized she wouldn't be able to take her eyes off it. She couldn't tell whether it was a dream or reality. Even if it was real, she wasn't sure she'd ever get the chance to witness such beauty again. That evening, they got so drunk the guys passed out, and the girl decided she no longer cared whether it was a dream or not. She just wanted to keep staring at that broad masculine chest. Dojin was already asleep, only letting out the occasional heavy sigh whenever the girl's hands touched him. Morning came, and the sun was shining brightly through the apartment windows. Dojin's head was pounding, and through the haze, he thought it was way too hot. Maybe Taiju had accidentally turned on the heater. His hand found something lying on top of him, and for a moment he thought it was a large dog. Cracking his eyes open, he saw it wasn't a dog at all. It was Jujoy, lying right on top of him, making his whole body ache. He sat up, head still splitting, unable to understand why she was even near him. Dojin got up, fixing his shirt, and wondered how this girl could act so carefree. He went into the next room and called Taiju, saying it was time to get up. The guy said they all needed to head to class, so Taiju and his sister should go home to change. Taiju, feeling no better than Dojin, asked why he couldn't just get ready at Dojin's place. They were neighbors after all. But Dojin told them both to go home because he still had to clean up the mess they made the night before. Dojin headed for the shower, hearing Taiju wake Juju in the other room, telling her they had to go to the university. Then he heard the girl's panicked shout that she was already late. Dojin turned on the shower water, thinking he must have overdone it. His head was killing him. But what was strange was that his chest was also sore. When he approached the mirror and saw what he looked like, he froze in shock. His chest and neck were covered in bruises and bite marks. He couldn't understand what had happened to him. It looked like a dog had attacked him. Then suddenly a hazy memory surfaced, Juju, drunk, coming to him, and the feeling of her hands on his chest. The guy blushed and smacked his face, overwhelmed with shame. What the hell had that girl done to him? Meanwhile, students were happily leaving the lecture hall. Juju could barely move her feet. She felt awful. She told her friend she was probably going to head home. The girls said goodbye, cheerfully waving to each other. Suddenly, Juju got a text from Go Dojin. He was asking where she was. That was strange. He had never texted her out of the blue before. She replied that she was on her way home. She figured something must have happened if he was texting her. The girl was already near the exit when she suddenly saw a familiar figure. Dojin was standing by the gates, hood pulled low over his face. Seeing her, he immediately called out to her sternly. Juju hurried over and asked what had happened. Was something wrong with Taiju? But the guy replied that her brother was in class. Juju grew even more confused. It felt like he had something important to tell her, but he also looked irritated. After a few awkward moments of silence, the girl asked what was going on and what he wanted to talk about. Go. Dojin gave a short laugh, pulled down his hood, pointed at the bruises on his neck, and asked if she could see what had happened to him. Juju was shocked. It looked terrible, to say the least. But she asked why she had to listen to some relationship drama from her older brother's friend. Dojin chuckled again and said he couldn't believe she didn't remember what happened last night. The girl stepped back and asked what he was even talking about. She was about to protest, saying there was no way she could have done something like that. But then suddenly she remembered the feeling of touching his chest, and shame washed over her. She didn't know what to say in her defense. The guy looked at her calmly and said it was good she finally bothered to remember. He grabbed her hand and said she was now obligated to follow him. The feel of his hand made her heart race. She was ashamed of what happened, and more importantly, it seemed like Dojin was seriously mad at her. When they got home, he dragged her so quickly behind him that they kicked off their shoes in a rush and went straight into the apartment. Juju tried once again to apologize, saying her memory was foggy and she barely remembered anything. But looking at her expression, Dojin thought there was no way she was lying. She really didn't remember. When the guy reached for the hem of his hoodie, Juju's face turned red and she panicked, shouting, "What are you doing?" Dojan gave her a sideways glance and said he just wanted to help refresh her memory. When he pulled off his hoodie, the girl saw the marks on his body and let out a cry of horror mixed with embarrassment. She liked his figure but was ashamed of what she'd done. The guy stood there without a hoodie, just as embarrassed, and told her to take a good look at her handiwork. Thanks to her, his body had been aching all day. Dojan asked if everything was okay with her. Why was she biting people like some kind of dog? The girl couldn't take her eyes off him and kept apologizing. He grabbed her chin, lifting her face to meet his gaze, and told her to look him in the eye. He asked if she seriously thought a simple sorry was enough after all that. Juju was completely captivated by the sight of his chest, so her apologies didn't sound nearly as sincere as she had intended. Dojan said that with the face like that, her apologies seemed fake. And anyway, why was she smiling? Did she want him to put her through the same thing she put him through? Juju had only seen the guy this mad once, right before the midterm exams. Taiu kept pestering his friend with questions about when he would finally get the courage to get closer to the class president. The girl didn't want to listen to their gossip, especially since they were blocking her view of the TV, so she rather rudely told them to leave and stop bothering her. Dojan told his friend that they shouldn't talk about such things in front of a child and suggested they go outside. Taiu was surprised why his friend considered Juju a child. That time, Go Dojin had been staying over for 2 days in a row because he and her brother were working on a joint project, and both of them were grumpy and utterly exhausted. Taiu tried to draw Dojin's attention to how shamelessly grown up his sister had become. Juju, however, told them to get lost already, saying they could work on their project at Go Dojin's place. Her brother decided to teach his sister a lesson and tried to start a playful fight, but due to sleep deprivation, he was clumsier than usual and accidentally knocked over a can of coffee, which spilled on the laptop. The problem was that the laptop belonged to Go Dojin, and because of the spilled coffee, it broke, along with the project they had worked so hard on. Taiu and Juju stared in horror at what had just happened. An ominous aura seemed to emanate from Go Dojin, and the friends froze, seeing him like this for the first time. Even though the guy stayed calm, he looked like he was ready to kill someone. Juju clearly remembered how long Taiu had to beg him for forgiveness that time. In reality, Go Dojin is a very good person, and both she and her brother are rather meek, so they aren't shy about apologizing when necessary. So Juju got on her knees, clasped her hands in a pleading gesture, and began apologizing, promising it would never happen again and that she didn't know what had come over her after all. Even when drunk, she'd never done anything like that before. She was sure the sight of her would melt his heart and he wouldn't be able to stay mad. She glanced at him and said she'd do anything he asked. Go Dojin remained motionless, taking deep breaths, and simply told her to stand up. He asked if he had understood correctly, that she wasn't the type of person who did stupid things when drunk. She replied bashfully that it was true. He sighed and said he'd forgive her this time, and only because it was her. But she must never behave like that with anyone else or she could get into serious trouble. He said from now on she should be more careful and that he wasn't sure he could trust her the same way as before. The girl was relieved he forgave her so easily and obediently nodded in agreement. Suddenly, Go Dojin asked what she would do if something like that happened again, but Juju assured him it never would. But then her gaze drifted again to his broad, beautiful chest, and blushing, she thought she couldn't be 100% sure. So she cheerfully declared that if it ever happened again, she'd let him do to her what she had done to him. A vein pulsed on Go Dojin's temple in irritation, and he asked if she had completely lost her mind. 2 weeks passed, during which Juju was essentially Dojin's personal servant, having to fulfill all his requests. And now, once again, he was bossing her around. The girl didn't like it, but she endured it so their conflict would be resolved. Taiu observed his sister's strange behavior and asked his friend what he'd done to make her so obedient. Dojan replied that he had no idea and told his friend to start packing his things. Juju appeared and, with a sweet smile, said to leave the coffee for Appa on the table. Her brother smiled and said he wanted coffee from his sweet little sister too, but Juju made a rude gesture and told him not to even dream of it. Then Dojan only had to say her name for the girl to sigh in defeat and say she understood. To his credit, most of the guy's requests were just for coffee or small favors. For example, she had to wake him up every morning according to his class schedule. When she asked how long she'd have to keep doing his errands, he said until the marks on his chest completely disappeared. But by the end of the week, curiosity was eating her up. What if he had already healed and was just fooling her? Juju couldn't bring herself to ask him directly, so she decided to check for herself while he was sleeping. But as soon as she reached for the buttons on his shirt, the guy immediately grabbed her hand and asked what she was trying to do. The girl blushed and panicked, embarrassed that she had been caught doing something like that. She didn't want him to think the wrong thing, but she also didn't want to admit that she just wanted to check the bruises. So she lied and said she was just trying to wake him up like he'd asked. But Dojan didn't believe her and got angry again, asking if she was drunk. She yelped at his outrageous assumption. This wasn't like that at all. Juju sighed heavily, wondering why she couldn't summon the courage to just ask if his chest had healed. While she was making coffee and thinking her slavery might end soon, she overheard her brother talking to his friend. Taiu didn't understand why Dojan didn't want to go study abroad. The girl placed the coffee on the table and asked why he really didn't want to leave. After all, he only had to improve his grades a little and everything would work out. Taiu, who didn't understand what was going on, asked his friend why Juju was so sweet to him, but always rude to her own brother. Dojan looked up from his tablet and suggested that maybe it was because he was staying home while his friend was leaving for another country, leaving the sister behind. Juju pouted and didn't understand why the guy didn't want to go away with his brother. After all, it was only for 4 weeks, during which time all the marks on his body would have healed, and they would have forgotten all about it. She didn't notice that Dojan was secretly watching her from behind the tablet. His cheeks turned red, and he thought the girl was still as naive and silly as ever. On Friday morning, Juju woke up in the apartment completely alone. Her brother had already flown out. Suddenly, she smelled a pleasant aroma coming from somewhere in the apartment. She couldn't figure out what smelled so good. Then she got suspicious. Where could such a smell be coming from if she was supposed to be living alone for the next 4 weeks? She quickly rushed out of the room, thinking maybe her brother had forgotten about his flight and was cooking in the kitchen instead of leaving. Entering the kitchen, she heard a noise and immediately asked if her brother had forgotten about his flight today, but then froze when she saw a familiar figure in an apron. That sight definitely mesmerized her, and she could barely whisper. What was Go Dojin doing in her apartment? Seeing the dumplings, she exclaimed happily, then collected herself and asked again why the guy was in her kitchen. But Dojan just said it was already too late, so if she planned to have breakfast, she'd better hurry up, wash up, and change. Juju couldn't understand why he was making her breakfast. It felt like she was dreaming some strange dream. Finally, she loudly said again that this wasn't the time for that. What concerned her was the fact that the guy was making her breakfast. Why was he doing this? Did Taiu ask him to? While setting the table, the guy calmly replied that yes, Taiu had asked him to make sure his sister didn't starve to death while he was away. He didn't seem the least bit embarrassed. He finished setting the table and told her to hurry before the soup got cold. Juju, on the other hand, felt very awkward. They were alone for the first time, and in the same room no less. Seeing all the delicious side dishes he had prepared made her mouth water, and she asked if she could eat first and shower later. Dojan sighed and asked why she was asking for his permission. It was her business, after all. So, the girl rushed to the table. Sitting down and overcoming her embarrassment, she asked if she had understood correctly. Would Dojan be cooking for her while her brother was away? The guy sat down across from her and simply said yes. Juju then asked, what about cleaning? Would he take care of that too? The guy smiled slightly and replied that cleaning was also his job, but the laundry would be Juju's responsibility. The girl was happy to hear that, as she was used to her brother doing such things for her. She sincerely thanked him for breakfast. When she tasted the first spoonful, she couldn't believe her taste buds. She exclaimed that it was incredibly delicious. She even jumped up and asked if he had really cooked it himself or bought it. Dojan replied that he had made everything himself. Juju praised him and said he was even better at it than Taiu. Go Dojin and Taiu study at the same university and in the same department, so they always hang out together after classes. Juju followed their example and enrolled in the same university. When Go Dojin found a place to live near the university, the girl found out that the apartment next door was available, so she signed the lease and she and her brother moved in. Juju was going to university and thinking about the fact that even though they had lived next door to each other for most of their lives, she felt uncomfortable knowing that now they were practically living alone together. She could call him the annoying appa in the neighborhood. They used to barely talk because they felt awkward around each other. They started talking more often after getting into university. She slowly put on her lipstick, suddenly realizing that this was the first time they had eaten alone together. The food and the marks on his body made her feel embarrassed. She tried to act like nothing was happening, but her heart kept pounding. If she were Taiu, Dojan would definitely be spending the night at her place. While the guy was washing the dishes after breakfast, the girl mentally hoped that he wouldn't make her serve him for all those 4 weeks. She wanted to discuss all this with him, so she called out, but Dojin suddenly asked why she hadn't left for class yet. He asked if she wanted him to make her coffee. There wasn't a hint of a joke in his voice. Juji was touched by his care, but that wasn't what she wanted to ask. Her heart beating loudly, she asked if the marks on his chest had healed. Dojin took a defensive posture and asked why she was suddenly asking him that. The girl got flustered and said he misunderstood her. The guy crossed his arms and asked with a smirk if she was curious just to know whether her slavery was over. Juju gulped and objected that he misunderstood her again. Her heart kept pounding. She suddenly wondered, was he always this tall? Dojin kept smiling and asked, then what? Do you want to admire my chest again? Juju held her hands out and said she was just worried about him and asked him not to stand so close. Feeling something firm under her hands, she realized she was touching his chest again and thought how broad and strong it was. But then she blushed from shame and quickly tried to explain. She said she didn't mean to do anything like that, she just wanted to push him away a bit. Dojin covered his chest with his hands like an offended maiden and said tensely that Jujoy was really something else. The girl quickly ran out of the apartment. She thanked him once again for breakfast and wished him a good day. Dojin sighed in relief, but then suddenly heard the girl's voice again. He grew worried. What had happened now? Juju came back to let him know that she had plans with friends in the evening, so she would be having dinner with them and he didn't need to cook for her. The guy felt something unfamiliar. She looked so cute to him that his heart skipped a beat. He wondered, is this what older brothers feel? He was about to go back to the dirty dishes when he saw the handbag she had forgotten on the table. Juju was already putting on her shoes and about to leave when she heard his voice calling her. She wondered what he could possibly want. Dojin came over and tapped her on the head with her bag, saying she shouldn't be so careless. The girl thanked him in surprise. Then, suddenly, the guy asked who she was meeting. Girls? She smiled and said yes, she was meeting up with the girls from her group. He felt relieved and wished her a good time, reminding her not to drink too much. The day was coming to an end and the sun was slowly setting. Juju was having a great time chatting with her friends at a restaurant. She was drinking another glass when the girls started discussing the new guy at the university, saying he was incredibly handsome. One of the girls said she knew who they were talking about. His name was Sunung Min. He was tall and very good-looking. Another friend said she was right. His name was Sunung Min. He had a lot of followers on social media and had mentioned he wanted to become a trainee. One of the girls nudged Jujoy with her elbow and said there's no way she didn't know who they meant. Jujoy looked confused and said maybe she had seen him around. The girls giggled and said they had seen that guy trying to subtly sit next to her at the last apartment meeting. They were sure he liked her. Juju didn't remember anything like that and felt uncomfortable because of all the hints, so she honestly admitted that she wasn't interested in him anyway. Her friend told the girls that Jujoy wasn't the kind of girl who would fall for someone just because of their looks. She asked her friends if they had seen the girl's brother. In the IT department, there were 2 famous heartthrobs, real celebrities, and Juju's brother was one of them. The girl could swear that when she saw him recently, he was so handsome it was blinding. Juju was glad the attention had shifted to her brother, but suddenly one of her friends said she was sure he had a girlfriend. This surprised her. She took another sip of alcohol and said her brother didn't have a girlfriend. She was certain of it. The girls sighed with relief and said they knew you shouldn't believe the gossip spread in local student communities. Suddenly, a handsome guy with blonde hair approached them and happily said he was glad to see his seniors. Juju immediately recognized that it was Sunung Min, whom they had just been talking about, and she felt uneasy. The guy beamed and asked if she'd mind if he sat next to her. The girl stared at him silently, thinking that after what the girls had told her, it would feel awkward. Sungmin looked at the girl with hopeful eyes, not taking them off her. When Juji first started university, she was still getting used to drinking, so one day something happened to her. She still smelled a bit of alcohol when she came to class the next day after the party. When she entered the classroom, she was surprised by how warmly and cheerfully everyone greeted her. Her friend was upset, asking why she had to learn everything from rumors and not from Juju directly. She was disappointed, and Juju didn't understand what she meant. She dumbly stared at her friend and asked what rumors she was talking about. The girl replied that the whole university was saying Juji and Suwon were having a fling and made a beautiful couple. Juju froze. She had no idea where these rumors had come from. It wasn't true. Later at home, she told her brother about it, and he asked again who the guy was. She said Suwon was a senior from her department. He was spreading rumors that something had happened between them. Taiu was ready to beat up anyone for his sister, so he demanded she give him that jerk's number. But Juji replied they hadn't even exchanged numbers. That made the rumors even more infuriating to her. Taiu was on edge and asked if the guy had lost his mind. He told his sister he didn't have any classes the next day, so he would go to the university with her. At that moment, Go Dojin entered the apartment. He wanted to ask if Taiu had finished his work, but froze when he heard the conversation. Juju said everything was fine and that she wasn't a child, but her brother objected, saying she was a 20-year-old child. Dojan asked what they were arguing about. His friend replied that he had just found out that some idiot was bothering Seo Jujoy. So he declared he'd go to class with her the next day because he wasn't going to let that guy get away with it. He asked his friend if he agreed. Dojan thought for a moment and said that Jujoy wasn't entirely wrong and that Taiu might be overreacting a bit. Her brother's overprotectiveness sometimes drove her crazy, so she thanked Dojin and said she could handle such problems on her own. She got up to leave and said the matter was no longer up for discussion. She thought that Dojin's cold composure unnerved her even more than her brother's overprotectiveness. She appreciated that her brother cared, but she didn't want him solving her problems all the time. She wanted to finally be seen as an adult. After all, she was no longer a child. Meanwhile, Go Dojin sat down next to his friend on the couch. Taiu asked him whether, even if he thought he was overreacting, he didn't think it was better to step in now before it was too late. Dojin calmly said that he shouldn't have said anything to Jujoy at all. He didn't have classes the next day either, so the two of them could have just dealt with it together. Now, staring into her empty glass, Jujuy, her mind fogged with alcohol, realized she couldn't even remember what had happened after that day. She realized she had gotten drunk again and didn't feel very well. Sunung Min was closely watching her and noticed she was no longer thinking clearly. A sly smirk flickered across his face, and a sneaky plan formed in his mind. He scooted as close to her as possible and spoke to her. Juju didn't like it. She felt uncomfortable next to him, but he leaned toward her ear and whispered that she had left her umbrella in the classroom and he had taken it. He said he had left it at his house and offered that she come over to get it back. Even though Juju was drunk and her mind was fuzzy, she felt that she didn't like being around this guy. She was even more annoyed that her friend Sojong had left her seat under the pretense of going to the restroom, letting the guy move next to Jujoy. Now she was discreetly encouraging her friend, thinking the two of them liked each other. But Jujoy felt creeped out. She couldn't understand why her friend didn't see the obvious. She wasn't interested in this guy. The girls were playing a drinking game called Rabbit Carrot. The loser had to drink. Jujoy kept losing over and over, and the more she drank, the harder it became to keep playing. Sunung Min was carefully watching her. She had clearly drunk too much, but that only played into his hands. Earlier, when he invited her over, she had said it was fine, she'd get it later, or he could bring the umbrella to the university. But the guy didn't give up and, trying to sound as charming as possible, said that it was going to rain tomorrow, so she should come over so she wouldn't get wet. But Juju confidently replied that it wasn't necessary. She had plenty of umbrellas at home. It angered him that he couldn't manage to seduce her. Watching the girl hand Jujoy another glass, he wondered why the girl was so cold toward him. Were his charms really not working on her? The girl could barely hold the glass in her hands, so he offered to drink it instead of her, and the other girls approvingly said he was like a knight on a white horse. But Juju flatly refused his help and said she could handle it herself. Then she downed the full glass of soju cocktail in one gulp. Everyone at the table froze, and for a few moments, silence fell over the group. Sojong finally realized that maybe her friend didn't like the handsome guy at all, and that their efforts to match them up had been in vain. The other girls seemed to come to the same conclusion and decided it was time to wrap things up, suggesting they all head home. Upon hearing that, Shin Sunung-min put his arm around the now completely drunk Juju and asked her friends where she lived. He wanted to walk her home, but his behavior raised concerns among the girls. Even though they studied together, he was still almost a stranger, and his eagerness seemed a bit suspicious. Sojong quickly stood up and said his help wasn't needed since Jujoy lived nearby, and they would call her Appa to pick her up. Meanwhile, Go Dojin was staring at his phone, growing anxious about why she hadn't come home yet. It was almost midnight. Then suddenly his phone rang. He asked why she was calling so late, but he heard a completely different voice. A girl told him the name of the bar and said Jujoy was so drunk she couldn't walk. She asked him to come pick her up. The guy jumped up from the couch immediately. He ran so fast that he broke into a sweat. Entering the bar, he was out of breath. Juju's friends were relieved that Dojin came to get her. Meanwhile, the guy stood frozen at the unpleasant sight before him. He locked eyes with a guy who clearly wasn't happy about his arrival. And why was Juju sitting next to him unconscious? Watching some guy with his arm around her, Dojan felt anger boil inside him. What the hell was going on here? Dojan gave the stranger such a cold stare that the guy immediately withdrew his hand from the girl. Kneeling in front of her, he anxiously wondered how she let herself get into such a state that she couldn't even open her eyes. He tried to wake her up, but she didn't respond. Realizing she was completely out of it, Dojan lifted her onto his back like she weighed nothing. Sojong handed him her friend's bag and thanked him again for coming to pick her up. She watched him walk away with Juju on his back when Sunung Min quietly approached and said Juju's brother looked really intimidating. But the girl simply replied that he wasn't her brother. She explained that Juju's brother had gone abroad for a short time, and now his friend was looking after her. The guy was surprised and asked if it wasn't dangerous to let her go off in that state with another man. Sojong thought that he looked way more suspicious and dangerous, and now even more so. She answered that those two had known each other since childhood and were like family. But the guy stared thoughtfully after them, thinking it was impossible for a man and a woman to be just friends. In the end, everyone said their goodbyes and went home. When they got home, Go Dojin laid the drunk girl in bed and covered her with a blanket. He thought about how careless she was and how she could behave so recklessly. Then he remembered the guy in their group, and his anger and irritation surged. Didn't Jujoy understand what could have happened? He was mad at her for being so careless. Still, everything ended well, so he tucked her in and let her sleep peacefully, deciding to talk to her about it the next day. Closing the door to her room behind him, he exhaled deeply and wondered when Jujoy had grown up. She used to be so easy to handle. How had he not noticed how mature she'd become? He was worried about her habit of drinking more than she should and the way she behaved afterward. He remembered the incident with his chest and blushed. One time, Juju had gotten really scared. It happened when she was a child. She had woken up at night after hearing a noise and thought it was her father, so she went out of the room and asked why he was still up so late. But it turned out a burglar had broken into their apartment. The event was so traumatic that even now as an adult, she trembles when she's home alone at night. The robber was afraid of being caught, and unfortunately, the girl got hurt. Dojan was still little when he heard that the police had come to their neighbors because of a robbery, but he didn't know the details. Only recently, before leaving, Taiu told him that Jujoy had been injured. That's why he understood why her brother was so worried and didn't want her to be alone at night. Since he's gone, Dojan would have to stay overnight in their living room. Juju slept restlessly. She felt unwell and kept tossing and turning in her sleep. Sitting up, she felt a strong dizziness and didn't immediately understand where she was. Leaving the room and holding her throbbing head, she wasn't sure if she was still dreaming or if this was really happening. Suddenly, she saw a stunning sight. Dojan was lying on her couch, and his beautiful broad chest was like a beacon. Juju decided she must still be dreaming. Just like a dog can't resist a juicy bone, Jujoy couldn't take her eyes off the guy's muscular chest. She decided that since this was a dream, it would be fine, so she climbed on top of him. Dojan was dreaming that a mosquito in the form of Jujoy was biting him, and he mumbled sleepily while trying to swat the annoying bug away. Morning came, and the guy felt a weight on his chest, as if someone was lying on him. Opening his eyes wide, he saw the girl sleeping on top of him and thought she was at it again. She must have gone crazy. There were marks on his body again. He started shouting for her to wake up immediately. Jujoy, barely hearing the yelling, slowly opened her eyes and asked what was going on. After a while, she finally saw Dojin's irritated face and realized she'd done the same thing as last time. She froze in horror, realizing that even though she had promised not to do it again, she had gotten drunk and messed up once more. A little later, while taking a shower, the girl anxiously thought about what she should do now. She scolded herself for her behavior. She had thought it was just a dream, and the moment she saw the guy's chest in the moonlight, she lost control. Juju suddenly remembered their agreement. If it happened again, Dojan would do the same thing to her as she did to him. Just thinking about it made her heart flutter strangely, almost in anticipation, and the girl grew scared. Why was she feeling such conflicting emotions? Go Dojin was like a brother to her. So why did she feel this excited thrill? She suddenly thought about how tall the guy had become and how big and strong his hands were. She wondered what it would feel like if he touched her. But then she quickly snapped out of it in horror. Such thoughts scared and embarrassed her. She felt like she was losing her mind. How could she even think such things? This was Go Dojin, the friend of her brother whom she had known since childhood. She was flustered and didn't know how she could even look him in the eyes now. A terrible truth dawned on her. Dojan was attracting her as a man. After a while, the girl was sitting in the living room, nervously fidgeting with her fingers. The guy ran a hand down his face and exhaled heavily, asking if she remembered what they had agreed upon last time. He was angry and said that he had made it very clear. If something like this happened again, he would pay her back the same way. Juji sat there, burning with embarrassment, unable to believe she was actually about to face the consequences. She asked if he was really serious. Dojan looked just as embarrassed as she was. But he was also angry, so he said sternly that he wasn't joking and that she had to honor their agreement. A little earlier, the girl came out of the shower and sat there looking guilty, burning with shame. She could see that the guy was truly very angry with her. His piercing gaze and silence made her incredibly nervous. Eventually, he made tea for both of them, and sitting across from her, he asked if she understood where her drinking habits could lead. Juju tried to justify herself, saying she usually didn't drink that much. She tried to put on a pitiful expression so Dojan would feel sorry for her, and said that this was the first time in her life she had gotten this drunk, and that she didn't have any particular fondness for alcohol. The guy was clearly irritated and, sighing heavily, asked if she had done something like this with someone else before. The girl immediately replied that, of course not, and that this was the first time something like this had ever happened to her. That only confused Dojan even more, and he asked what the hell was going on with her. Why was she suddenly doing this now? Could this be some weird fetish of hers? While the girl stayed silent, he said he was considering taking her to a psychiatrist. Juju was incredibly embarrassed, but knew she had to give him at least some logical explanation, so she clenched her fists and started talking about her favorite actor. He had a broad, beautiful chest. Thanks to him, she realized her ideal type was a man with a muscular chest. Dojan crossed his arms over his chest and grumbled, asking if that meant any broad chest would do for her. But the girl objected, saying that wasn't the case at all. She began passionately explaining that it wasn't just about the width. The frame, muscles, and shape, all of it played an important role in the overall picture. That's why she confessed that when she saw Oppa, she realized he was perfect in that sense, and blushing, she apologized. Dojan got up from the table and sighed heavily. Despite her honesty, he decided she needed to be taught a lesson. Reaching for the hem of his hoodie, he started pulling it off. Juju stared at him in shock, not understanding what he was doing. He looked at her seriously and said that he hadn't been joking last time and reminded her that they had agreed. If it happened again, would pay her back in kind. The girl couldn't believe he was being serious. But Dojan gave her a stern look and said she had made a promise and had to honor their agreement. In truth, he hadn't planned to do anything like this. He just wanted to scare her a bit. Her behavior worried him, and he wanted her to understand she couldn't act like that. Especially with strangers. It could get her into trouble. He thought he wouldn't give in to her pleas for forgiveness, but suddenly his eyes widened when something completely unexpected happened. Juju grabbed the hem of her hoodie and pulled it off. He stood frozen, not believing she had actually done it. He had thought she'd just beg for forgiveness like before. He was so stunned he couldn't move, overwhelmed with embarrassment. His cheeks and ears turned red. He thought this girl had definitely lost her mind. He should scold her for being so reckless, but for some reason, he couldn't say a word. Juju looked him in the eyes and asked if he was going to do it. Dojan knelt in front of her, and even though everything inside him screamed that this was wrong, he just exhaled. Then he leaned toward her and, as if under hypnosis, touched her neck to leave a mark just like she had left on him. At some point, a thought crossed his mind. Why did Juju, who had never paid him much attention before, now seem so different from the image of her he had in his head? He thought that he wished he could be the only one to see her like this. But then he suddenly pulled away from her and was horrified by what he had just done. But to his surprise, Juju wasn't scared of him at all. She started scolding him for overdoing it, saying that he only had marks on one side while she had them on both. She was mad and said it wasn't fair and that now he owed her. Dojan chuckled and said she was right. The girl stared at his face and couldn't believe that her appa, who always walked around with such a serious and grumpy expression, could make such an adorable face. At some point, both of them realized that their silly standoff had ventured into uncharted territory, and they were both surprised and excited. Dojin stood up and began putting his hoodie back on, but the girl couldn't take her eyes off him. A tense silence hung between them, and the next moment he turned around and walked toward her. And just a second later, he pulled Juju into a hug and kissed her. At that moment, a thought flashed through the girl's mind. They were in a dangerous situation, but she wasn't afraid at all. Being next to him made her feel so comfortable that she wasn't scared of anything that might happen between them. Dojin gave her a mischievous smile and said she was insanely beautiful. A little later, while the girl lay in his arms peacefully dozing off, Dojin suddenly realized that, in fact, he had been waiting for this moment for a long time, and that he had finally understood his true feelings for Juji. For some reason, he remembered an incident from school when a girl was hiding around the corner, crying bitterly. He had a guess as to why she was upset, so he followed her and stayed nearby, ready to protect and support her if necessary. Back then, he thought she was just a silly girl. Juji returned home after calming down and cheerfully called out to her brother that she was home. Taiu suddenly asked where Go Dojin was, but the girl looked surprised and asked why she should know where his friend was wandering. The next moment, a bag of groceries dropped on her head and she let out a surprised yelp. She turned around and angrily asked what his problem was. The guy irritably said that he was her appa, and she shouldn't talk to him like that, then handed her the bag. Turning away, he headed for the door and told Taiu to hurry up so they could go to the internet cafe. The girl looked at the bag in confusion. Opening it, she saw only snacks and sweets inside and was surprised. It turned out Dojin had simply bought them for her. Taiu, noticing his sister examining the sweets, asked his friend why he had brought them. Dojin replied, "Just because." Standing by the elevator, the guy said he had heard that Dojin's older brother had already set a wedding date, and that Juji had cried for days after hearing the news. Dojin knew that Jujoy had a crush on his older brother, and that the news of his engagement had upset her. It wasn't surprising, but for some reason it bothered him. And although he had only just figured out his feelings, he realized that he had actually been in love with her for a very long time. So instead of continuing to hide his feelings or trying to comfort her with candy, he wanted to openly confess them to her. It was already dark outside. The moon shone high in the sky. Juju's eyes suddenly flew open, and for a few moments she tried to grasp where she was and what had happened. Then she jumped up, horrified by the realization of what she and Dojin had done. Clearly, both of them had gone crazy. Then she noticed she was wearing his t-shirt. It was soft and smelled nice. The thought that Dojin had dressed her while she slept made her feel a bit embarrassed. Peeking quietly into the kitchen, she saw him standing at the stove. She didn't know how to behave around him now. After what had happened between them, she wasn't sure how he'd act. But the smell from the kitchen was so tempting, he cooked like a god, and she couldn't resist the urge to eat. Suddenly, Dojin turned around, having heard a rustle behind him, and smiled. "Oh, you're up already?" Juju didn't know what to expect from him and was surprised by how friendly he was. Then she froze as he walked toward her. In the next moment, his hand gently wrapped around her waist, he pulled her closer and kissed her lightly on the forehead. Juju, overwhelmed and confused by what was happening, looked at him with wide eyes. Dojin looked so sweet and gentle and said they could sit down and have dinner. She sat at the table while he set the plates and thought that this all felt strange and unfamiliar. He was acting like her boyfriend. When he sat down across from her, she thanked him for the dinner. The smell really was amazing. Juju felt so awkward she might have run away from the table if the food hadn't smelled so good. The guy kept beaming with joy and smiling, saying she shouldn't drink outside the house anymore. Hearing this, the girl asked why she should promise him something like that. She kept thinking about how he kissed her forehead and the way he was treating her now. It was so unusual. She decided to clarify the situation and asked, "What happened between us? Was that just a one-time thing?" Dojin wasn't embarrassed at all. He smirked and asked what she was talking about. "After everything that's happened between us, of course we're going to start dating." Juju froze, spoon in hand, not immediately processing what he had just said. She couldn't form a sentence in which the words him and her would go together with the word dating. She asked him, "Won't it be weird if we start dating? For the past 10 years, I've treated you like an older brother. And what would Taiju say?" He didn't look confused or awkward. He simply said, "There's nothing criminal about it. We're not even related. So why can't we date? As for your brother, we'll just tell him straight up." Juju looked at him, realizing he was right. What she liked most about this idea was that if they did date, his beautiful broad chest would be entirely at her disposal. But then she dropped her head into her hands, remembering the one reason she wouldn't want to date Dojin, because he was a crazy possessive type. One time she, her brother, and Dojin were drinking at a restaurant, and he admitted he'd be willing to do anything for his girlfriend. Taiu asked what he'd do if, after all his sacrifices, the girl cheated on him. Dojin, a bit flustered, said he'd try to make sure that never happened. When asked how, he said he'd cut off all her communication with other men. Taiu and Juju exchanged knowing glances and silently agreed that the guy was a total psycho. Taiu asked, "What about you? Will you also stop talking to all the women around you?" Without hesitation, his friend said, "Of course, I'll block them all. No discussion." Juju nervously sipped her drink while listening to her brother argue with his friend. Her brother kept saying that Dojin wouldn't be able to isolate his girlfriend from the whole world since she'd still go to work. But Dojin replied that it wasn't necessary at all. Hearing that, Taiu exclaimed, "You're not planning to lock the poor girl in the apartment, are you?" Juju, meanwhile, remembered how she used to wonder why such a handsome guy didn't have a girlfriend. But now she understood. Despite his charm and kind nature, he was just an possessive type. She had always thought he'd never have a girlfriend, and now she was horrified to realize that she had become that girlfriend. Dojin smiled cheerfully and asked what she was so deep in thought about. "You should eat before the food gets cold." Juju also thought there was no way he had asked her to date him because of feelings. It was more likely that he just felt responsible for what had happened between them. So she asked if it wouldn't be weird to start dating just because of that. Since they didn't have strong feelings for each other, it seemed more logical to go on a few dates first and then decide about a relationship. She figured that if Dojin spent a bit more time with her, he'd realize they weren't compatible at all. Dojin's expression became unreadable, and in a flat tone, he asked if she really considered relationships some kind of game. Was she mocking him? Then he gently took her hand in his and intertwined their fingers, holding her tightly. Juju felt goosebumps run down her body. His touch was so tender. She stared at him in surprise. Dojin brought her hand to his lips and left a light kiss, then said that it was she who came to him first, so she should take responsibility for what happened. Later, standing in the bathroom and looking at the marks on her arms, Juju thought that Dojin wasn't a dog, but her arms looked as if she'd been bitten by a rabid one. Her whole body was covered in marks, and she didn't know what to wear so no one would notice. The girl talked to herself while looking in the mirror, thinking about how Dojin had even demanded she take responsibility. Is this how relationships work? She wondered. A bit earlier, when she pulled her hand away from the guy, she declared that if he insisted so much, she would take responsibility. The guy looked pleased and happy and said that's exactly what he wanted. Blushing, the girl continued eating and thought he was really weird. But then suddenly she felt something and was surprised. Her cheeks flushed even redder, and she asked what he was doing. Didn't he realize that was her leg? Meanwhile, under the table, Dojin was slowly caressing her leg with his own. Smiling, the guy slightly pulled down the collar of his t-shirt, exposing his collarbones, and said that since she agreed to take responsibility, he was curious whether she wanted to explore the chest she was so interested in. At the sight of this, the girl even dropped her spoon, overcome with joyful anticipation. Then she realized she had fallen for her own weakness. If she hadn't been so obsessed with that damn sculpted chest, she wouldn't have given in so easily. So she said she needed to go to the bathroom. Suddenly, she felt his hand wrap around her waist. He stood behind her, holding her, and asked why she had been gone for so long. Then he gently touched her neck with his lips from behind, and a jolt of electricity seemed to run through her body. Juju enjoyed it, but it was all so new and awkward to her, so she called him a pervert and told him to stop behaving like that. Dojin was surprised and asked why she was calling him that. Leaning on the sink, the girl scoffed and told him to look at all the marks on her body. The guy scoffed back and said he couldn't believe he was hearing this from someone like her. He lifted his t-shirt, showing the marks on his body, and said that between the two of them, she was the pervert. Just look at her handiwork. Juju pulled his shirt back down and said they both had class today and suggested they go to the university together, then asked him to stop seducing her. Dojin replied that he knew if he kept seducing her with his broad chest, she'd fall madly in love with him, and then, without letting her say a word, kissed her. The girl thought despairingly that because of him, she definitely wouldn't get enough sleep and would be late for class. The next morning, Juju actually managed to make it to university on time. She sat in the lecture hall, but her thoughts were far from the classroom. She wondered if Dojin could focus on his classes. Yesterday, he had been so obsessed with her, but today, surprisingly, he was acting quiet. Worried, she messaged him on Kakao. The guy replied that his class would end at 5:10 p.m., and the girl said she would also be free by then. Then he suggested they have dinner together and asked her not to leave without him. Juju smiled at the screen and thought the emoji he used looked so much like him. She was acting like a lovesick fool. A silly smile spread across her face, and she wondered if Dojin had always been this sweet. Juju's class ended a little earlier than expected, but she planned to wait for Dojin as they had agreed. Walking past two girls, she accidentally overheard them talking about how cherry-flavored lip balm made kissing even more enjoyable. Apparently, there's even a popular challenge now, putting on different flavored lip balms and having your boyfriend guess the flavor. Juju stopped, thinking it was interesting, but didn't want the girls to notice her eavesdropping. She began rummaging through her bag, thinking this was a great excuse to kiss her boyfriend again. Finally, she found her lip balm. Hers was strawberry-flavored. She applied it to her lips, convincing herself it didn't mean anything and that her lips were just dry. Then she decided to hurry. She wanted to go to Dojan's class and surprise him, but didn't notice the guy walking past her. It was Sunung Min. When he saw her, he immediately recognized the girl and called her by name. But Juju didn't stop, so he grabbed her hand, pulling her closer to get her attention. He smiled and asked where she was rushing off to like that. The girl instantly recoiled from him as if he were fire, surprising the guy and asked what the hell he thought he was doing. Sunung Min raised his hands and apologized, saying he didn't mean to scare her. He was just happy to see her. Juju looked at him warily. His overly friendly behavior made her uneasy since they weren't that close, so she asked why he called out to her. The guy said he just wanted to ask how she got home. He didn't have her number and couldn't call to check on her. Then he asked if she'd give him her phone number. Juju didn't like this. She didn't want to be wrong, but it felt like he was flirting with her. The girl had no intention of doing that, so she said she was in a hurry and that she had a boyfriend. Sunung Min was very surprised. He didn't give up and said he'd heard she was single, to which the girl replied that things had changed now. Suddenly, Go Dojin appeared behind her and called her name. The girl immediately smiled at him, as if clinging to a lifeline. Sunung Min gave him a contemptuous look. He didn't like that this guy was interfering in his business for the second time. Meanwhile, Dojan radiated a dangerous aura. It was clear he wasn't happy to see this guy around his girl again, but he tried to ask calmly and gently what Juji was doing here. Juju darted toward her boyfriend so quickly that Sunung Min didn't have time to react. He wanted to stop her and talk a bit longer. The girl approached Dojan and, smiling, said it was time for them to leave. He looked at her strangely, clearly realizing something had just happened. But he didn't say a word. He simply exchanged a warning glance with Sunung Min. He didn't like that this guy was near Juji again. Sunung Min, in turn, was also unhappy to see Dojan. Then Dojan gently smiled and deliberately put his arm around the girl, saying they really should go now. The couple turned and walked away in each other's arms, leaving Sunung Min stunned as he watched them go. He adjusted the brim of his cap and thought, what the hell is going on here? Earlier, she had said Dojan was like family, but now things looked very different. Juju buckled her seatbelt and heard Dojan say, with a hint of jealousy, that she sure was popular with guys. The girl was surprised and said it wasn't true at all. Dojan looked at her and said it was true, that she was very attractive and many guys noticed her. Juju thought bitterly, finally I'm hitting a wall. His possessiveness. But even now it was hard for her to admit, and she thought, none of this would be happening without Sunung Min. She worried that Dojin would switch into possessive mode, but suddenly felt his fingers slip into her hand, intertwining with hers in a quiet gesture. The girl blushed and asked, are you jealous of me? And then the guy, blushing, confessed that yes, he really was burning with jealousy over her. It took her a few moments to absorb what she'd heard, and surprisingly, she felt something pleasant from his confession. But then she laughed cheerfully and said it was strange. She'd never seen her appa like that. Dojan, indignant, asked what was strange about it. Wasn't it natural for him to be jealous of his girlfriend when another boy flirts with her? But Juju explained that for her it was strange, because they hadn't even really started dating yet, and he was already jealous. Despite years of friendship, this had never happened before, right? Then Dojan gave her a sly smile and said she had no idea. He'd actually begun being jealous of her over other guys a long time ago. The girl was shocked by his confession, her heart racing. She stared wide-eyed and asked, what do you mean? Are you saying you've liked me for a very long time? The guy blushed and lowered his gaze, answering that it was true and that he hadn't wanted to admit it to himself for a long time, but that's how it was. Juju couldn't believe he had just confessed his love. She felt joy and excitement. She began quickly asking how long ago he realized it, saying she had no idea of his feelings. She thought he only asked her out to take responsibility for what had happened between them. Dojan looked embarrassed, but admitted that he had liked her since high school, but he didn't want to admit it to himself and was angry with his brother because of her, just because she liked him. The girl, shocked, covered her mouth with her hand. She could barely believe what was happening. For some reason, she'd never thought about her feelings for Dojan, but now she realized she had liked him too. The boy continued, saying it wasn't about responsibility. If it were, he would never have gotten involved with his friend's younger sister. Leaning closer, he declared that he'd had his own reasons to get close to her from the very start. Then he gently kissed Juju, and she felt warm feelings growing in her chest. She couldn't believe this was happening. He'd never shown his true feelings until today. And who would have thought he would torment the girl he liked for 2 whole weeks just because she touched his chest? So she pulled back and asked, "Are you expecting me to just believe you? Because until recently you had me making you coffee, waking you in the morning, and doing all these small errands." Dojin admitted that until that moment, he thought she was just drunk and touching people randomly. He was surprised that she was attracted to him specifically. Then he took her hand and said that now she could just touch his chest, that same chest she'd gone crazy about. As her hand rested on his chest, she suddenly asked, "Have you heard about the lip balm challenge?" Eventually, they went to the cinema and she felt strange. It meant they were really on a date. Dojin said he got her favorite combo, half salty, half caramel popcorn, and a cola, and asked if he'd got it right. Juju thanked him. He said he got the earliest movie tickets so their restaurant reservation wouldn't be missed. She said she was perfectly happy. She took a sip of cola and looked at Dojin's hands, thinking that since it was a date, they should hold hands. Suddenly, she heard his voice and feared he might be reading her mind. But unexpectedly, Dojin covered himself with his hands and bashfully asked her not to touch his chest in public. The girl was surprised and asked what he thought she was. She shouted that he was acting annoying and took a step forward. But then she stopped and said she took back her words and that she'd acted foolishly. Dojin smiled and asked what had come over her. She was so cute he felt his heart flutter. The girl got irritated again and told him to hurry up. Soon they were seated in the cinema hall. Juju sighed and ate popcorn. The romantic film was so boring, she yawned throughout and thought they should have seen a thriller. To her surprise, Dojin was completely focused on the movie. She sighed and decided to at least enjoy her favorite popcorn, and reached for the bucket, but her hand missed and bumped into something hard. Dojin smiled at her and asked, "What are you doing?" Juju was shocked, wondering if he'd gone insane. She'd barely touched him. In the next moment, he took her hand and said that if she wanted, they could leave early and spend some time together in the car. Juju looked at the guy for a few moments, feeling shy, but she didn't want to rush things, so she quietly said she wanted to finish watching the movie. Then she gently pulled her hand out of his grasp and focused all her attention on the screen. Dojin was a little confused. At that moment, a dramatic scene was unfolding between the main characters on the screen. The girl was jealous of her lover and demanded proof of his love. Juju pretended to watch the movie attentively, but in her mind, she thought the plot was strange and annoyingly reminded her of the recent situation with Dojin, when he admitted being jealous of her. She sank into the seat, sadly wondering if she should have agreed to go to his car. Was he upset with her? Meanwhile, the guy was also barely paying attention to the movie. His thoughts were spinning around Juju. He was embarrassed and excited. He carefully looked over at her and noticed she was focused on the movie. That made him feel even more ashamed of his earlier suggestion. Maybe she really just wanted to watch the film, and now he was worried. Had he offended her? Had he scared her off with his pressure? The evening was coming to an end, and on their way home, they stopped by a store. Juju enthusiastically suggested buying some beer, and Dojin was surprised she could think about drinking after everything they'd eaten. But she happily ran ahead, saying she'd grab a few snacks she wanted. The guy asked her not to run so she wouldn't trip. When Juju reached the fridge, her smile faded. She was tense, feeling awkward the whole evening. She had only accidentally touched him once. But even after the movie, she noticed the guy was restraining himself. Even during dinner at the restaurant, she saw how tense he was. It made her nervous. And even now in the store, she could still feel the result of her careless gesture. So she tried to maintain a cheerful front and act like she didn't notice anything. But it was getting harder. It scared her. What kind of beast thinks about only one thing all this time? After grabbing the snacks and drinks, she went to the counter where Go Dojin was already waiting. She came to the conclusion that he was just a pervert. While he was paying, the girl's eyes widened in surprise. She stared out the store window and told him to look. It turned out it had started to rain outside. Not just rain, a heavy downpour. She reached out her hand and the drops started drumming against her palm. Dojin offered to buy an umbrella, but the girl said it wasn't necessary since their home was very close. But after thinking a bit, she said she had forgotten her hoodie in his car, so maybe an umbrella would be useful after all. But when she turned around and saw her boyfriend, she immediately blushed and shouted, asking what he was doing. Dojin was standing in the middle of the store, undressing. The girl was embarrassed and asked why he was doing that. Taking off his hoodie, the guy just looked at her, then silently put it on her. Juju, completely caught off guard, froze in place. His clothes were way too big for her, but they were warm, and his scent wrapped around her pleasantly. Dojan pulled the hood over her head and gently said she could catch a cold if she got wet. Then, wrapping his arm around her, he smiled and said it was time to go. The girl stared at him in amazement. She didn't know he could be so caring. The store clerk, a young guy, watched them leave and thought with regret what a sweet couple they were. It made him feel very lonely. Their home was just across the street, but the wall of rain only got thicker. Once inside the building, Juju was delighted to see that thanks to Dojan's hoodie, her hair hadn't even gotten wet. She cheerfully thanked him. She heard his voice asking why she was still shivering. Was she cold? The girl replied maybe a little and looked over at him. Unlike her, Dojan was completely soaked. His white t-shirt clung to his body. He ran his hand through his wet hair, slicking it back and spraying droplets. The sight was so tempting that Juju couldn't look away. Suddenly, the guy covered himself and said she was staring at him again like a pervert. The girl blushed and protested, saying it wasn't true. Then she looked at him shyly and asked if it was really that obvious. Dojan softened, his cheeks turning pink. He gently said it was okay. In the elevator, the girl suggested they go home together so he could get cleaned up. As soon as the door closed behind them, their shoes and clothes began to fall to the floor chaotically. Dojan kissed the girl gently, holding the back of her head while she tried to tell him he should take off his wet t-shirt. Finally, the guy reached for the hem of his t-shirt, which clung unpleasantly to his body. Noticing how Juju was staring at him, he leaned toward her with a smirk and said she could touch him as much as she wanted. The girl gently ran her hands along his shoulders, sending shivers through both their bodies. They were both overwhelmed with emotion right there in the hallway. A little later, they were lying in a steam-filled bathroom. The girl complained indignantly that her legs hurt because of him. Dojan apologized, though his satisfied expression showed he wasn't really sorry. He offered to give her a massage, but Juju firmly refused, saying he was up to something again. Unable to resist Dojan's pressure, sometime later the girl sat at the edge of the bathtub, breathing heavily and holding onto the sink. She had stayed in the hot water too long and was now feeling dizzy. Dojan was already brushing his teeth and said she looked like she was about to collapse. He reminded her not to forget to brush hers and asked if he should hand her a toothbrush. Juju sighed and said she was completely drained because of him and that he should help her. She wondered to herself where he got so much energy from. Did he really like her that much? Hearing her ask for help, the guy excitedly asked if he really could help her. When he gently took her chin, the girl got scared he was up to something again, but he reassured her that he sincerely wanted to help her get ready for bed. Her eyes widened in surprise. Looking at him now, she couldn't believe he could look this way. Was he really so in love with her that he was ready to brush her teeth and help her get ready for bed? Dojan smiled warmly, like he was talking to a child, held out the toothbrush to her mouth and gently said, "Say let's brush your teeth first." But then, seeing her red face and strange look, he froze and asked if she was okay. She looked like she had a fever, but Juju said it was just from being in hot water too long and asked him to hurry. The next day, the girl felt amazing. Classes were over and she was packing her things. Suddenly, she heard someone call her name and turned around. It was Sojong, who hoped Juju didn't have any plans for today. The girl wanted to grab a drink and chat a bit, but her friend hesitated and said it probably wouldn't work out. Sojong was hurt and said that lately her friend spent all her time with her boyfriend. Juju apologized and promised to treat her another time. Sojong kept insisting that it had been so long since they talked or went out together, and she was dying to know how she was doing. Juju thought to herself that there wasn't much to tell since she and Dojan barely left the bed lately. Then she remembered she had promised her boyfriend not to get drunk outside the house anymore, so she told her friend that she couldn't today because her parents had come to visit. Hearing this, Sojong stopped being upset and said that since she was going to be her brother's wife, she could say hello to her future in-laws for her. After finishing the conversation, Juju rushed down the stairs. She was running late and hurrying to meet Dojan, who was already waiting for her in the car. Suddenly, someone grabbed her sweater so sharply that she almost fell. Barely keeping her balance, she froze, trying to stay on her feet and wondering what the hell was going on. Who grabs someone like that while they're running? It scared her. Do you restrict access to the service and platform for any specific countries? Turning around, she realized she was right. It was Sunung Min. He had popped up out of nowhere again and thought he had the right to act like this. Blushing, Sunung Min quickly blurted out, asking if she could give him a minute. He needed to discuss something with her. His face looked sincere and worried, which surprised the girl, so she asked what was going on. She decided to hear him out. The guy really was concerned. He had accepted that she felt uncomfortable around him and was ready to back off after she said she had a boyfriend. But after witnessing a disturbing scene recently, he couldn't just let it go. A few days ago, Sunung Min was walking through the parking lot, smoking. Suddenly, he heard a girl scream and recognized her voice. It was Juju Sanbae. When he decided to check what was going on, he saw the girl with her boyfriend and froze. What he saw disturbed him. Juju was shouting and demanding that the guy put her down. Sunung Min could even see tears in her eyes. But her boyfriend was unfazed and carried her over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes, saying she was too loud. Juju, in turn, was hitting him with her little fists, demanding to be let go. Then he saw the guy throw her into the car like she was just some object. Sunung Min stood still, unable to understand why she was dating someone who treated her so roughly. He just couldn't stand by and do nothing. So now he confessed to Juju that he had witnessed that scene and was genuinely worried about her. He asked why she was with someone like that. Juju blushed deeply and covered her mouth in horror, saying she had no idea what he was talking about. She remembered that day and felt incredibly embarrassed. She didn't even know how to explain it. Meanwhile, Sunung Min kept talking, worried, saying how loudly she had screamed. He had been about to rush to help her, but the car sped off so quickly with her inside that he couldn't catch up and kept worrying if she was okay. Juju immediately remembered that day. She and Dojin were heading to the car, and she started pestering him with questions about whether something had happened between him and that girl from school, the class president. He was surprised and asked how she even knew about that and why she brought it up. She meant the time she overheard his conversation with her brother. Taiu had teased him, asking when Dojin would finally make a move on the class president. Juju reminded him of that conversation and said that her brother had ruined his laptop and their joint midterm report. Dojan adjusted his cap awkwardly and said that was a long time ago, and there was nothing for her to worry about. She hoped he would be surprised and ask if she was jealous, but his serious expression upset her. She had planned to joke, but now her head was full of other thoughts. She grabbed his shirt and asked why he wouldn't talk about it. Didn't he say she was his first, just like he was hers? So what now? Was that a lie? In the next moment, he caught her hand and stopped her, saying it wasn't like that at all. The class president had confessed to him, but he rejected her. He wasn't interested in a relationship at the time, and the rumors spread quickly. He didn't want everyone talking about it, so he tried to avoid the subject. Mostly, he was worried she'd be upset over something so silly. Juju felt awkward and hurt, saying she wasn't upset, just bothered that he hadn't told her the whole truth. Dojan realized she was jealous and could barely contain a smug grin. She looked so cute at that moment. Finally, he couldn't hold it in and laughed out loud, genuinely and happily. Juju was irritated and asked why he was laughing at her. He said she was just adorable and asked if she was really that in love with him. There was amusement in his voice. Embarrassed and annoyed, she tried to argue that she wasn't and was only dating him for his broad chest. Dojan kept laughing and said it hurt to hear that, even if he knew she was joking. But Juju, still flustered and upset that he had laughed at her, said he'd see. It was true, and threatened that when his chest shrinks, she'll dump him for another guy. After those words, his amusement vanished, and he said threateningly that she better stop joking like that. She sassily replied she wasn't joking at all. Dojan sighed heavily and said he just couldn't believe this, then suddenly picked her up and threw her over his shoulder. With tears shining in her eyes, Juju asked what he was doing. He smacked her and said she should just wait until they got home. She'd see what he was going to do to her. As of that moment, she was on the naughty list. Now Juju stood, hiding her face in embarrassment, thinking about how to explain to Sunung Min that he had simply witnessed a silly lover's quarrel that got a bit out of hand. Then she suddenly realized she didn't owe him any explanation at all, so she firmly stated that they weren't close enough for him to ask such questions or discuss her private life. And besides, why did he think it was okay to just grab people like that? It scared her, and he shouldn't do that. Sunung Min scratched his head guiltily. He said he just thought something serious was going on, so he wanted to talk. Still, she responded strictly that they weren't that close, and she'd prefer it if he didn't show so much interest in her from now on. Then she abruptly turned around and headed toward the parking lot, leaving him behind. Sunung Min felt guilty but didn't understand why she reacted so harshly to his concern, so he stood there in confusion. After a while, Juju finally reached the car. She got into the car and apologized for being late. Dojan smiled and said it was okay. He asked if something had happened. The girl thought about that jerk Sunung Min but didn't want to tell her boyfriend about it. She still remembered their last conversation and how Dojan had felt jealous of her, so she didn't want to cause any more misunderstandings between them. So she fastened her seatbelt and simply said her classes had ended a bit later today. Dojan accepted her answer and cheerfully said that his older brother had called and invited them over for dinner. Go Dojin, the divorced older brother and Juju's first childhood crush, had called Dojan with his son in his arms, saying they missed them and were looking forward to seeing them. Juju was so excited. She adored Chaemin, Dojan's nephew. He was a very cute little boy, so she happily said she wanted to go. She didn't even realize how tightly she'd grabbed Dojan's thigh. But then she quickly let go, saying he was a beast. What kind of reaction was that? Dojan smiled guiltily and suggested they stop by home briefly before heading to his brother's. Soon, the two arrived at Go Dojin and Chaemin's place. Juju peeked out from behind Dojan and shyly greeted them. Chaemin was so happy to see his Nuna that he shouted with joy and ran up to her. The boy hugged her tightly with his little arms, and she jokingly asked if he had really missed her that much. He shouted loudly that he missed her very, very much. Dohyuk tried to scold his son and told him to get down. But Chaemin stubbornly declared he was going to marry Juju Nuna, so he wanted to stay close to her. Juju smiled brightly, hugging the boy and saying that her future husband wasn't heavy at all. Dohyuk smiled, happy to see how much his son loved Juju, and apologized for him. Dojan, who had been silently watching until then, suddenly said he didn't want to disappoint his nephew, but he wouldn't be able to marry Juju. He rested his head on his hand and, without taking his eyes off Juju, said that she was his girlfriend. In the next moment, the boy even dropped his toy car and asked Juju if it was true. Dohyuk also asked his brother how long they'd been dating. Chaemin, sitting on Juju's lap, couldn't believe she had a boyfriend. Meanwhile, Dojan stuck out his tongue at him just to tease. Juju hadn't expected them to reveal their relationship today, so she stood in shock. The boy in her arms suddenly burst into tears. A while later, Chaemin was still sniffling, burying his face in his father's chest, upset that his future wife was dating his uncle. Juju sat, embarrassed, next to a very pleased Dojin and said that, yes, they had started dating a while ago. Go Dohyuk was happy for them, but found it hard to believe it all happened so quickly. Taiu had just left recently. He said that the girl's brother would definitely be shocked, but he personally was happy for them. For some reason, Dojan tensed up at that. He glanced sideways at Juju. She blushed and shyly accepted his brother's congratulations. For some reason, Dojan's thoughts turned a little gloomy. Dohyuk smiled and said that although Dojan was his brother, he didn't seem to be in Juju's league. So, what exactly did she like so much about his younger brother? The girl paused to think, and Dojan, grinning, leaned toward her and asked what was wrong. They both knew there was one specific part of him that made her fall for him. He clearly enjoyed teasing her. Juju blushed. She couldn't talk about that, especially in front of his older brother. The next moment, Dojan felt a sharp pinch on his back. Juju had pinched him and whispered that they'd talk about it later at home. Then she loudly suggested changing the topic. Soon after, Juju was looking at a photo on her phone. She was holding a crying Chaemin in her arms, and Dohyuk was smiling in the background. She said Dojan was a great photographer. She looked at the photo and said he really should have taken one with them. He simply replied that he thought his nephew would have been even more upset if he had stood next to her. His voice sounded odd. Since they had been neighbors for years and Dojan had been friends with her brother, Juju had come to know him well. His habits and quirks that most wouldn't notice. For one, he wasn't exactly hot-tempered, but he was really obvious when he was sulking. For example, his standard set of 3 irritation signs: furrowed brows, annoyed sighs, and touching his bangs, which was exactly what he was doing now. He thought he was good at hiding his emotions, but he wasn't. Juju watched him carefully, trying to figure out what had upset him. They had a great dinner and a fun time, so what was wrong? Was he upset that she pinched him? Soon, when they got home, Dojan was sitting on the couch in front of the TV. The girl decided the best way to make up with him was to seduce him. So she put on his oversized hoodie and walked out to him. Then, putting on an innocent look, she pitifully asked him to help her roll up the sleeves. She came up to him, and with an unreadable expression, he started rolling up the sleeves to make her more comfortable. But to her disappointment, he was still frowning. Maybe she was crazy, but she found him really cute like this, so she couldn't resist and kissed him. She sat on his lap and ran her hand over his chest. Still, the guy wasn't responding, he just glanced at her hand. Despite Juju trying hard to seduce and kiss him, he took her hand away and pulled back. That shocked and offended her. This had never happened between them, so she asked what the hell was going on. Was he seriously ignoring her? To her surprise, Dojan sighed heavily and asked if it was true that the only thing she liked about him was his muscular chest. She froze in shock. Was he really that dumb to think that? Was that what had been bothering him? She stared at him silently. Meanwhile, he wrapped his arms around her waist and said he just wanted to know why she was dating him. He hugged her tightly, his heart racing from anxiety. He said if it was just because he pushed her into it, then he was sorry. Juju cut him off and said he was confusing her. She stroked his hair and said yes, she liked his body, but it wasn't about pressure. She just genuinely liked him. Pressure had nothing to do with it. She took his face in her hands and, smiling, told him he was just silly. She was dating him because she truly loved him. Her confession touched him, but he still asked what she liked about him besides his broad chest. Juju laughed and said that, sure, at first that was the only thing that attracted her, but now she was with him because she was really in love with him, and he didn't need to worry. Then she gently kissed him. Then, suddenly, Dojan confessed that he had gone to meet her when she didn't show up at the parking lot for a long time and saw her talking to the same guy as before. When that guy asked why she was meeting with Go Dojin, she didn't give him an answer, which made him feel sad and wonder if she was only dating him out of a sense of obligation. Juju felt relieved to finally understand why he had been sulking all this time and thought he was really sweet. She wanted to explain everything to him. But Dojan continued, saying he knew how long she had liked his older brother. Seeing how well they got along today made him feel jealous, and all of it together upset him. The guy looked at the girl, feeling relieved that he had finally spoken out about what had been tormenting his thoughts all evening. Then Juju gently cupped the back of his head, pulling him close and telling him he was a real grump. Before he could object, she said that she really was in love with him just the way he was, and then kissed him. Pulling away, she calmly said that she was in love with a guy who was completely obsessed, acted like a child, and had a big thing. Then she adjusted her slipping hoodie and said she didn't like guys who couldn't take a hint, and that she had been upset too. Dojan lifted her into his arms, saying he'd keep that in mind for the future, and asked if she enjoyed teasing him. Juju wrapped her arms around his neck and happily replied, "Very much." He carried her into the room and leaned over her with a playful smirk, saying she'd pay for teasing him. But in the next moment, she caught him off guard, flipped him over, and straddled him. Smiling, she said that tonight she was in charge, and honestly, Dojan had no objections at all. Their kiss was long, and both of them felt their bond growing even stronger. Meanwhile, in London, it was still daytime. Seo Taiu was lying down, scrolling through news on his phone. He suddenly jumped up when he stumbled upon an interesting post. In one of the university community pages, someone clearly wrote about him and Go Dojin. It said that one of the handsome guys from the computer science department had gotten a girlfriend, clearly referring to Dojan. They said he was dating a hot beauty from the business department. Taiu was surprised. When had his friend found a girlfriend, and why hadn't he told his best friend about it? At first, he thought of his sister since she was also in business, but that couldn't be it. Then he figured Juju must have introduced Dojin to someone from her department. That made him jealous because his own sister never wanted to introduce her poor brother to anyone. Dojan received a ton of messages from Taiu. He forwarded the post and wrote that Dojan wouldn't get away with this, saying he was sure it was about him. He asked if Juju had introduced him to someone and why he hadn't shared the news. He also asked if his little sister was eating well. While Dojan briefly replied that he made sure Juju ate 3 times a day, Taiu kept asking questions and wrote that he'd feel betrayed if the post turned out to be true. Dojan looked at the girl sleeping in his bed, tired after their passionate reconciliation. He didn't want to say anything to his best friend just yet, so he changed the subject and asked if Taiu had found a girl in London yet, since he bragged he definitely would. His friend replied that, unfortunately, their professor had lied, and there were no girls in their program. Juju was sleeping soundly, breathing softly and occasionally murmuring Dojan's name. He brushed her hair away from her face and gently stroked her cheek. He looked at her and realized he had deeper feelings for her than he had thought. Warmth filled his chest at the sight of her. He quickly texted back that they would talk when Taiu came home. This made Taiu stare at his phone in surprise. Was his friend really hiding something? And if he did have a girlfriend, why wouldn't he just tell him? The next morning, the table was once again overflowing with delicious food. Juju thanked Dojan for putting in so much effort every morning to feed her a tasty breakfast. Sitting down at the table, he mentioned that Taiu had messaged him and warned that he would be returning next Friday. The girl thought to herself that this meant they had only 1 week left. Then her brother would come back, and totally lose it when he found out they were dating. She wished he were staying away for more than 4 weeks. Dojan noticed the look on her face and asked why she looked so upset. The girl snorted and said she'd rather her brother never came back. Pulling herself together, she admitted it sounded bad, but Dojan cooked way better than her brother. Smiling, he wiped a crumb from her lips with his thumb. Then he licked his finger, not taking his eyes off her, and said he was glad it met her high standards. Then he smiled and asked if they should just kick Taiu out and move in together. Juju blushed immediately. She couldn't resist how handsome he looked and asked why he was saying it so seriously, because she wouldn't be able to say no. He laughed cheerfully. He loved making her flustered and asked what he should do with her. Then he reached for her hand, took it in his own, and seriously, hopefully asked if she agreed. Their fingers intertwined, and still overwhelmed, the girl replied that she definitely agreed. They sat across from each other, feeling their hearts beating in sync, gazing at each other with love. But classes hadn't been canceled, so both headed off to the university. While the professor was speaking, Juju couldn't stop thinking about how the news of her brother's return was bothering her. She was sure he'd freak out when he found out she was dating Go Dojin, but eventually he'd get over it. What worried her more was that the two boys always seemed to live in their own world when together, and she feared everything would go back to the way it used to be. She was angry because she knew her brother would drag her boyfriend off to gaming cafes or somewhere else to hang out. She angrily tapped away on her laptop, wondering if it was time for her brother to get married and move out so he'd finally leave them alone. Then she suddenly blushed and wondered, would it be too soon if she and Go Dojin decided to get married? Her thoughts were interrupted by Sojong, who asked why she was still in the classroom since the lecture had ended long ago and everyone had left. Juju replied that she was so deep in thought she hadn't noticed. Sojong asked if she was free today to finally hang out at a cafe, since she always had to reschedule because of her boyfriend. Juju was about to refuse, but then she had a brilliant idea. Why hadn't she thought of it before? Everything would be easily resolved if Taiu had a girlfriend, so she suddenly asked Sojong if she still wanted to be introduced to her friend's brother. Evening was already approaching, and the friends headed to a local cafe. Juju called Dojin and told him she would be back for dinner, asking him not to worry. Watching their conversation, Sojong asked her friend if that had been her boyfriend. The girl replied yes and asked if she had sounded too sweet and in love while talking to him. Sojong reassured her, saying it was fine and that all couples acted that way during the honeymoon phase. Juju, meanwhile, was thinking about whether she should really introduce her friend to her brother, as she felt the girl was too good for him. But the girl herself asked Juju about her brother. She wondered if it was true that Juju had introduced them. Her cheeks turned red. Juju admitted that she was actually dating her brother's best friend, and that when Taiu found out, he would definitely freak out. That's why she thought it would be easier for him to accept if he had a girlfriend himself. But now, thinking about it, she felt bad for planning to use her friend like that. She said Sojong was right. They really hadn't hung out like this in a long time, and she was sorry for bringing up her brother. But to her surprise, the next moment her friend slammed her hands on the table and told Juju not to be so silly. Sojong clutched her chest and passionately declared that she really wanted to date her brother, so Juju absolutely had to introduce them. She promised she'd do everything she could to win his heart. Juju, a bit flustered, replied that in that case, she'd introduce them when he got back. Juju said she was happy her friend liked Taiu, but she was afraid the girl had an idealized image of him. He could be incredibly annoying once she got to know him. But her friend blushed and suddenly said that it wasn't just his looks. She actually had something to tell Juju. She began talking about the time when rumors had spread at the university about Juju and Suwon having a fling. Sojong said back then that Kim Suwon was telling everyone something had happened between them. Juju was furious and said they had barely exchanged a few words, and yet he was already spreading such talk. The girls around them began criticizing the guy, while Sojong felt a sharp pang of guilt because she had started the rumor herself, thinking that Juju liked Suwon and wanting to help them get together faster. But now she realized what a mess she'd made and had no idea how to fix it. Walking along the road, she remembered how Suwon had told her he talked to Juju, and she had admitted to him that she felt uncomfortable around other guys. That's why Sojong decided to start the rumor that they were dating, and he went along with it. But now, she didn't know how to face her friend. She wanted to apologize as soon as she saw her and could only hope Juju would forgive her, but Juju had skipped classes, so she had to wait until the next day. The next day, someone called out to her, and when she turned around, she saw a handsome guy. It turned out to be Juju's brother. He asked if she happened to know Juju from the business department. Sojong was so impressed by his looks that she blushed and stammered that she was Juju's best friend and could call her if he wanted. But the guy put his finger to his lips and said conspiratorially that there was no need. He was here in secret. Then he asked if she was really close with his sister and if he could ask her for a favor. A little later, Sojong stood in front of Kim Soo-won. She had called him out to convince him to stop spreading rumors about her friend. The guy replied that Sojong had been the one who started them. So what did she want from him now? She accused him of lying to her. He said Juju had confessed she liked him. He leaned over her and smugly asked if she had any proof that he had said that to her. This threw her off balance. How could that be? He had definitely told her that himself. But the guy kept towering over her and said she had no evidence and no one would believe her, especially since she was the one who had suggested spreading the rumors. He raised his hand as if to hit her, yelling that she'd better never talk to him like that again. The girl threw her hands up in terror to protect herself, tears welling in her eyes. But nothing happened. Suddenly, she heard a familiar voice asking Soo-won if he was done, and she cautiously opened her eyes. It was Seo Taiu, who had caught the jerk's hand and was towering over him, sternly saying they needed to talk. While Juju's brother dealt with the creep, Go Dojin appeared next to Sojong and asked if she was okay. The stunned girl said yes. Taiu stepped forward and said he knew Soo-won had gone to Seonghwa High, and he had friends there who told him the guy was a creep who stalked girls. He'd heard that Soo-won liked spreading rumors before, which even earned him a nasty nickname. Soo-won tried to protest and asked what it had to do with him. Why was he sticking his nose where it didn't belong? Taiu replied that it had everything to do with him, because this was about his little sister. The next moment, Dojin stepped forward and didn't bother with pleasantries. He grabbed the guy by the collar and growled threateningly. He looked like a total maniac, so Soo-won got really scared. Dojin said if he ever even walked near Juju again, he'd make sure Soo-won got expelled from university. Meanwhile, Taeju turned to a terrified Sojong and asked if she was okay. The girl was shaken, but said she was fine now. The next moment, she couldn't hold back and burst into tears. She felt terribly guilty. Taeju tried to comfort her, thinking he had scared her and apologized. But the girl quickly assured him it wasn't his fault. She admitted she was the one who had started the rumors about Juju around campus. She had wanted to tell her friend the truth, but had been too scared Juju would be mad and never want to see her again. To her surprise, Taeju didn't get angry. He just chuckled and said his sister really was scary when angry. That's why he and his friend had come in secret. If she found out they were here, they'd be in trouble. He gently wiped the girl's tears and, trying to calm her down, asked her to keep their appearance here a secret. Sojong was touched by his kindness. She agreed, but said she still had to apologize to her friend. At that moment, Dojin was recording Soo-won's promise on a voice recorder, that he would never come near or speak to Juju again. Taeju gave Sojong a charming smile and said she must be a freshman if she was friends with his sister. He added that everyone makes mistakes when they're young, so she shouldn't be so hard on herself. He advised her to apologize to Juju when the time was right. She would understand and forgive her. Then he asked her to always remain a loyal friend to Juju. The girl blushed and agreed. From that day on, her heart belonged to Taeju. After hearing her friend's story, Juju said Taeju was so annoying. He acted like a grown-up even though he was only a couple of years older than her. Sojong nervously clutched her cocktail glass and said she knew it was late, but she still wanted to apologize to her friend for everything. Juju calmed her down and thanked her for her honesty and apology. She admitted that Taeju had been right. If she had found out back then, she wouldn't have even listened. But now, she wasn't mad at her at all. She understood the girl had only meant well. Sojong felt like a weight had been lifted from her chest and gave her friend a big hug, saying she was the best, and jokingly added that maybe they could start dating. Juju patted her friend on the back. While she was in her friend's arms, she suddenly wondered what had really happened with Go Dojin. She remembered how cold and indifferent he had seemed, yet he had secretly gone to deal with her offender behind her back. The girls chatted for a little while longer and soon headed home. Juju was eager to hug her boyfriend. When she ran into the house, she kicked off her shoes on the go. Her heart was overflowing after her friend's story. Dojan was just about to start making dinner and said that she had mentioned wanting to eat tteokbokki. He didn't even get to finish his sentence before Juju ran toward him and jumped into his arms, spreading her arms wide to hug him. She felt like she had fallen even deeper in love with him. Dojan caught her, surprised by her behavior, and told her she should be more careful. Juju didn't answer. She just hugged him tightly and kissed him quickly on the forehead. Dojan was confused. It felt nice that she was so tender and energetic, but he asked what had happened to make her so cheerful. The girl looked at him with a very soft and loving gaze and confessed that she had simply realized how deeply he truly loved her. He said she already knew that, so why was she so moved by it just now? The girl asked what he would do if she ever got really angry. Dojan shifted her more comfortably in his arms, smiled, and said he would of course try to appease and calm her down. Then she asked what if it wasn't his fault. The guy replied that it would still be his fault anyway. But either way, he hoped she wouldn't get angry for no reason. Juju laughed happily. Her chest swelled with emotion, and giggling she said he was such a silly guy, and that he really must be madly in love with her. Dojan still couldn't figure out what had caused her sudden joy, but he was happy to see her glowing and replied that yes, he truly was. The girl took his face in her hands and thought, how could this guy be so incredibly adorable? Dangerously adorable. Then she pulled him closer, kissing him deeply, thinking there was no scenario where she'd lose him to Seo Taiju, not over her dead body. Dojan hugged her close, gently holding her and continuing the kiss. Still smiling brightly, Juju laughed and asked if he planned to love only her for the rest of his life. He kept holding her in his arms, overwhelmed with happiness. When he sat down on the couch with her straddling him and didn't answer, the girl demanded that he reply immediately. At that moment, Dojan thought about something he hadn't considered before. His feelings didn't scare him. They were strong and real. So he sincerely answered that he would love her forever. Deep down, Juju had always dreamed of hearing that, even though it scared her. Acting on impulse, she suddenly asked if maybe they should get married. The guy's face twisted in horror when he heard those words, and he froze. Such a beautiful moment was interrupted by a wave of fear. He looked at the girl with stunned eyes and asked what she was talking about. Seeing his reaction, the girl grew cautious and asked what was wrong. Didn't he want to get married? Dojan grew embarrassed and said that it wasn't like that at all. It had just taken him by surprise. Juju felt a pang of hurt and, turning away, said he could just forget the conversation ever happened, pretend like nothing was said. She was burning with shame. Why did she ever think he would like that idea? But the guy didn't want to pretend nothing had happened. He gently took her hand and said he was just surprised she suddenly started thinking about marriage. Juju, still embarrassed, couldn't meet his eyes and replied that he said he was in love with her, and she loved him too. Besides, Taiu would be coming back soon. She fell silent for a moment. Then she added more quietly that she didn't want her brother to steal Dojan away from her, so she thought it was a good idea. The guy exhaled with relief. So that's what had been on her mind all this time. He smiled and sincerely told her not to worry, because even when Taiu returned, Dojan wouldn't leave her side. It wouldn't be that easy to get rid of him. He gently took her hand and softly asked her to give him some time. Meanwhile, she could take her time to think and decide whether she truly wanted to marry him. Still smiling, Dojan pulled her into a hug and finally let out a calm breath. He said that even though Juju was being a bit childish, he was really happy to hear those words from her. But Juju pouted, thinking her proposal wasn't childish at all. She genuinely wanted to marry him, but now it felt like he had rejected her. Not wanting to bring it up again, she just said she wanted to eat dinner. 4 days later, the girl went to a bar to meet up with her friend. They clinked their beer glasses and were happy they finally managed to go out together. Sojong was surprised that Juju had invited her and even ordered drinks, since the girl usually refused to drink because of a promise to her boyfriend. Juju looked tense and drank eagerly from her glass, searching for the right words. Then she suddenly blurted out that her boyfriend had been ignoring her for the past few days. This shocked Sojong, since her friend had previously said he couldn't live without her. When the girl admitted that she had proposed to him a few days ago, Sojong's jaw dropped, and she asked if Juju wasn't rushing things. They hadn't been dating for very long. Juju, panicking, shouted that she knew that herself. The words had just slipped out, but the worst part was his reaction. Outraged, she said he had thought she was just messing around. It offended her. She felt like he still didn't see her as a woman, just a little sister. As a result, he had started avoiding and distancing himself from her after that conversation. The girl dropped her head onto the table and, crying, told her friend that he used to never take his eyes off her, and now he looked away the moment they saw each other. Sojong tried to comfort her, saying she was probably overthinking it. But the girl looked up at her with tearful eyes and asked what she was supposed to do now. It felt like he was disgusted by her. Sojong smiled and said it was obvious Juju had no prior relationship experience. She offered to let her try something. Wiggling her eyebrows and giving her a sly smile, she said her friend had once told her that guys go crazy over special surprises. She gave Juju a meaningful look, hoping she caught her drift. Juju immediately began to think, and a plan formed in her mind. The next day, thanks to express delivery, a package arrived for her. When she opened the box, memories of the conversation with Sojong immediately surfaced in her mind. How Sojong encouraged her and said it would definitely work. Blushing, Juju took out the contents of the box. It was a small piece of lacy fabric. She wasn't sure if Dojan would like something like that since she had no experience in such things, but she decided it was worth trying anyway. After changing, she felt embarrassed but told herself there was no turning back. She looked at her phone lying on the bed and decided it was time to call her boyfriend. When he answered, she tried to sound as calm as possible as she asked where he was and if he'd be home soon, adding that she was really hungry. Meanwhile, Dojin couldn't stop thinking about their recent conversation. He thought about Juju's proposal to get married and felt his heart pounding. Once he arrived at the jewelry store, he asked the sales assistant to show him popular ring designs. The salesgirl showed him couple rings and engagement rings, then asked which type he was looking for. Instantly, an image of Juju happily wearing the ring popped into his head. He hoped she would like the one he chose. Embarrassed, Dojin pointed at one of the engagement rings and said he would take it. He asked her to process the purchase quickly since he was in a hurry. It was a classic ring with a small gemstone in the center, but for some reason, it immediately caught his attention. The saleswoman smiled and said he had good taste. Dojin blushed and said he was planning to propose to his girlfriend. She smiled knowingly and asked if he knew his girlfriend's ring size. The guy scratched the back of his head. He hesitated for a moment and admitted he didn't know the exact size, but her fingers were very slim and small. He said he could probably identify the right size by feel. The girl then offered to let him try a sizing set with various ring sizes. After trying a few rings from the sample set, Dojin finally settled on one and said it seemed to match his girlfriend's fingers. Looking at how small the ring was, he thought about how tiny Juju's hands were. It felt like he was buying a toy ring. He thought to himself he should feed her more. Later, while still at the store, Juju called and asked where he was. When he said he was buying groceries, she was surprised and asked why he went alone. Dojin replied that he also had to stop somewhere else on business. Trying to change the subject, he asked what she would like for dinner. The girl hinted that for dinner she'd prefer if he just came home as soon as possible. Sighing heavily, the guy dropped his head, realizing he was in trouble and it would be hard to control himself. He promised he'd be home as soon as possible. Shortly after, Dojin returned home. He walked into the apartment carrying 2 full bags of groceries and called out loudly that he was back. Juju peeked out from the room. Still embarrassed, she was eagerly anticipating his reaction. Meanwhile, the guy stood with his back to her, unpacking the groceries, saying he was going to make the spicy chicken she liked so much last time. Juju interrupted him, calling his name, and Dojin turned around. But the moment he saw her, he dropped the groceries. Just one look at his girlfriend took his breath away and wiped all thoughts from his mind. Meanwhile, Juju calmly reminded him that she had already told him over the phone what she wanted for dinner. Her fingers slowly played with the buttons on the shirt she was wearing as she looked at him expectantly and told him to follow her. A bit later, in the bedroom, Dojin said he was pleasantly surprised and asked what prompted such a surprise. Juju blushed and said it was all his fault. He had clearly been avoiding her the past few days. When she invited him to the movies, he just ignored her. And when she suggested going somewhere together, he refused and avoided her, even though before that, he used to take her everywhere with him. This worried her, and she feared he had grown tired of her. Dojin thought about how he had been so busy with the proposal preparations lately. He had been so focused on the arrangements that he hadn't noticed her concerns. Now looking at her, he realized he had probably hurt her feelings and apologized, saying he'd been busy and was sorry she had felt that way. Then he leaned in and asked if she had really done all this just for him. Juju blushed and said she wasn't sure if he'd even like it. His face was so close to hers as he breathed out that anything about her was something he liked, so she shouldn't have worried. She looked at him in awe. Turned out all her worries had been for nothing. He stood in front of her, smiling sincerely, and told her she was simply amazing, making her heart race. Then he leaned in to kiss her, and Juju hugged him tightly, pulling him even closer. Sometime later, Dojin lay there smiling happily, holding the girl in his arms. He cheerfully said he liked little surprises like that and wouldn't mind if she did this every day. Juju blushed and said it wouldn't be fair if it was one-sided, so she expected surprises from him too. The guy was surprised and asked what else she had in mind. Encouraged, the girl asked him to promise he wouldn't say no. Dojin, unable to resist, agreed and asked what she wanted. Juju joyfully said she really wanted to see how a men's chest harness would look on his broad, muscular chest. A few days later, a package arrived for Dojin, and he stared at the contents thoughtfully, unable to believe he had spent money on something like that. Some of the items he hadn't even ordered. Must have been packed by mistake. Hearing Juju's voice, he got startled and dropped the item he was holding. Juju peeked into the room and asked if he was going to pick up her brother from the airport tomorrow. He nodded in agreement, and the girl, seeing he had a box, asked what interesting thing he had there. The guy hesitated and kicked the fallen item further away from himself so the girl wouldn't notice it, saying it was nothing special. Then he tried to lead the girl out of the bedroom and said he had asked Taiu to call a taxi, as Dojan had planned to go to the movies with her and spend the whole day together. A little later, the car was driving through the evening city. Dojan was behind the wheel, thinking whether he had prepared everything and considered all the details. Seeing the thoughtful expression on the girl's face, he asked if she was okay, if she was feeling unwell. Juju replied that she was very worried about Taiu returning tomorrow. She was nervous and asked if he wasn't worried at all. What if her brother decided Dojan wasn't worthy of her and wouldn't allow them to date? The guy looked calm and asked since when she worried about such things. Besides, if Taiu forbids it, then what? Is she going to leave him? The girl nervously replied that it wasn't like that at all, and he knew it. The guy tried to comfort her. He gently placed his hand over hers and said that even though her brother's opinion was important, there was no way he was going to break up with her. He left a tender kiss on her hand and said that Taiu would understand everything. Then with a smirk, he added, "Especially after he realizes you can't live without my amazing chest." Juju pulled her hand back and blushed. She said she'd kill him if he ever said something like that to her brother. The guy laughed cheerfully and said she could try. Then the girl, laughing, threatened him and told him to at least park the car first. Sometime later, Dojan was standing in front of the bathroom mirror. His heart felt like it was about to leap out of his chest. He kept repeating to himself that everything would go perfectly. He had bought flowers, a ring, and even rented this amazing hotel room. He had even prepared a suit to impress Juju. Meanwhile, Juju was admiring the luxurious hotel they ended up in. She was surprised why he had rented a room. But Dojan, from the bathroom, replied that he had worked so hard to clean the entire apartment before Taiju's return that it would be a crime to mess it up again before he got back. The girl flopped down on the bed and asked a little sadly what would happen now. Were they really going to hide and pretend in front of her brother that nothing had changed? The guy asked what she meant, and Juju, staring at her phone, replied that it used to be like Taiu lived in 2 homes. He spent all day at Dojan's apartment and returned to their place at night. Dojan asked if that really upset her. The girl kept lying on the bed, not noticing that he had already come out of the bathroom, and asked if she was the only one thinking about how they were going to handle this situation. Annoyed, she thought that was exactly why the idea of marriage came to her. She didn't want to live separately. So she irritably said that in that case, he could sleep alone every night like before. But then she jumped on the bed when she saw her beloved in a completely unexpected way. Dojan was looking at her with love in his eyes, holding a bouquet of flowers in a suit he had bought just to please her. After a moment, he said he had been afraid to sleep alone without her lately. It was clear he was nervous, but the guy continued, confessing that the thought of waking up in a world without Juju by his side scared him. Juju froze in shock. She couldn't believe it was really happening. Her heart started pounding wildly, and tears of joy welled up in her eyes. Dojan got down on one knee in front of her, holding the bouquet with trembling hands, and asked if she would marry him and share this life with him. Overwhelmed, he got a little flustered and forgot to take out the ring right away, so he reached into his pocket. Finally, he held out a velvet box on his palm. He didn't have time to say anything more as Juju, overwhelmed with emotion, threw her arms around his neck, hugging him tightly. She knocked him to the floor and, holding back tears of joy, sincerely and happily said that of course she agreed. Then she leaned toward his face. A wide smile lit up her face, and she asked what was up with that seductive outfit. The guy grinned back and said she had asked him to surprise her, so he did his best. He asked if he managed to impress her. Leaving a kiss on his neck, the girl replied that he was driving her crazy and that the harness should become a permanent part of his wardrobe. Then she ran her hand over his chest and asked if she could take a picture of him for memory. Suddenly, their idyllic moment was interrupted by a phone call. They both looked at the phone, and Juju asked if he was expecting a call from someone this late. Dojan looked confused and said no. Maybe it was Taiu calling to ask him to pick him up tomorrow. They decided to call him back later. Meanwhile, Taiu had returned home earlier than expected. He had lied about his flight to surprise them and came back not on Friday but late Thursday night. But when he came home, he found no one there, and Dojan wasn't answering his calls. Suddenly, his eyes caught on something lying on the floor in the room. What he saw surprised him and made him think that even someone like Dojan had peculiar preferences. But what the hell was that thing doing in his house? It was already quite late when the young couple returned home. Juju was still grumbling about how Taiu almost ruined everything again, as usual. Dojan was calming her down, saying he probably called so as not to wake his sister. The girl anxiously asked if they would tell her brother about their relationship right now. The guy replied that if she was worried, they could postpone that talk. Juju shyly examined the ring on her ring finger. It was beautiful, and she was struggling to contain the emotions overwhelming her. She decided it would be best to tell him, and do it together. Meanwhile, Taiu came out of the shower and, drying his wet hair, immediately started grumbling at his friend, saying he had asked him to watch over his sister since she couldn't sleep alone due to nightmares. But then he froze in shock, seeing Dojan together with Juju, and asked what the hell was going on here. The young people were standing next to each other. The guy asked why they had come together. Dojan and Juju awkwardly tried to explain how it happened, stumbling over each other's words. They tried to lie, saying the girl had gone to the movies and the guy had simply come to pick her up. But Taiu stood there puzzled, trying to understand what the two of them were talking about. Then he asked why his sister dared to bother Dojan over such a stupid matter and why she even went to the movies so late at night. But Juju irritably shot back, asking what about him. Why did he say he'd arrived the next morning but instead came late at night and disturbed Dojan? Taiu was annoyed and asked on what grounds his sister was treating him so coldly. Wasn't she supposed to miss him after not seeing him for so long? The siblings stared at each other, their eyes shooting lightning in a silent battle. Dojan tried to calm them down, saying he knew deep down they were happy to see each other, so they should stop acting like kids. He added that he was really glad Taiu came back early. Then he turned to his friend and said there was actually something he wanted to talk to him about. Taiu replied that he had been waiting for Dojan to finally come clean, and that his silence had really hurt him. After all, Dojan had a girlfriend now. Dojan froze in panic and asked when his friend found out. The guy answered that during their last chat, Dojan had mentioned he would tell him everything once he returned to Korea. In the post, it said the girl was from the business department. So he asked, "Is it CO Juju?" The girl blushed and asked in a panic if he had known all along. Had she worried for nothing? Taiu hugged his younger sister and replied that of course he knew, and now she should feel guilty. Then he suddenly asked why she hadn't introduced this girl to her brother first. Why did she only help Dojan? Juju was surprised, then realized her brother had misunderstood everything. She couldn't take it anymore and irritably blurted out, "What are you even talking about? I am the girl who's dating Go Dojin." For a few moments, Taiju's mind was consumed with a heavy thought process. Then he recalled the recent discovery he had made in his friend's room. He pieced together all the clues and the fact that his friend hadn't answered his calls. When he imagined what his best friend might have been doing with Juju, he felt pure horror. But the next moment, fury surged through his entire body, and he clenched his fist in rage. Then everything happened too fast. Taiu grabbed Dojin and his fist slammed into his friend's face. He yelled, asking how Dojan dared to hit on his little sister. Meanwhile, Juju tried to separate them. The next morning, Taiu sat at the edge of the bed, his head hanging in despair. He wondered if he had gone too far by punching Dojin. Meanwhile, a tempting smell of freshly made breakfast was wafting in from the kitchen. Taiu peeked out of the room and, still upset at his friend cooking at the stove, admitted to himself that the food smelled delicious. Without turning around, Dojan heard movement behind him and asked if his friend was already up. Then he turned and asked him to sit down because they needed to talk anyway. A couple of bruises were visible on his face. Taiu agreed and asked if it hurt much. Dojan, setting the table, said he was fine, and even if Taiu felt like hitting him again, he would let him. Sitting down at the table, he told his friend that he had known him since childhood and knew the kind of person he was. Looking him seriously in the eyes, he said he was confident he could make Juju happy and was willing to endure as many punches as Taiu wanted to give. Taiu stared at his friend in surprise. He really had known him for almost his whole life and had no doubt about his sincerity. Dojan turned to his friend again and asked if he truly believed he wasn't capable of taking proper care of his sister. Taiu looked at him suspiciously and asked, "What if I do? Would you break up with her then?" When he heard his friend reply that he would, he shouted that Dojan was a real bastard. Dojan replied that he loved Juju, but if his best friend truly believed he would hurt her, then he would trust him and leave before anything irreversible happened. Taiu sat down opposite his friend with a heavy sigh and said he was too damn eloquent. Admitting defeat, he told Dojan to take good care of Juju and wished them to be disgustingly happy together. Dojan laughed cheerfully and said that's exactly what he planned to do. He had no doubt Taiju would grumble, but eventually approve of their relationship. Sometime later, Juju sat on her boyfriend's lap, hugging him, and said she felt a bit better since she had been really worried about what happened last night. Dojan said everything was fine now and that they could finally move in together, with Taiju living nearby. Juju, who had eavesdropped on their morning conversation, asked if he really would have broken up with her. Dojin smiled and asked if she would have been that upset. The girl asked what kind of answer that was, and said she had no choice but to punish him for upsetting her. Laughing, he asked what kind of punishment she meant. Juju replied that she'd use her standard, harshest punishment. The guy pretended to be scared and said she needed to look at his chest immediately. Maybe then she'd pity him. The girl smiled slyly and said she wasn't sure it would help. She needed to look first, then decide. She climbed on top of him and they both burst out laughing, joking, and enjoying how well everything had turned out. 2 years passed after these events, during which many things happened. First of all, Dojan and Juju went to her parents to ask for their blessing to get married. Her parents' reaction was somewhat mixed. Her father was surprised and couldn't understand why Juju had chosen Dojan of all people. Her mother, on the other hand, was absolutely thrilled. Dojan was embarrassed, and Juju didn't have the words to describe the situation. But the real drama unfolded when they visited Dojan's family. Chaemin threw a full-blown tantrum, saying he would never forgive his uncle for stealing his bride. It took the girl a long time to calm the little one down. She reached out her arms to him and asked him to stop crying, calling him into her embrace. The girl tried to calm him down, apologizing for upsetting him, and hugged him despite the boy continuing to say he would never forgive them. After receiving their parents' blessings on both sides, they registered their marriage but decided to postpone the wedding ceremony until Juju's graduation. Juju was getting ready for the classes when she heard Dojan's voice. He asked where she was going so early. The girl replied that she had to go to university. The guy was surprised. He had hoped to get some sleep after working, but ended up sleeping until morning. He kissed her on the cheek and asked her to be careful, wishing her a good day. Taiju, who still lived next door, would always ask them to tone down their affection in front of him. Then he asked his sister to help him with some paperwork when she got home. The guys had grown closer than ever. They even started a business together after graduation, and Juju often helped them since both were bad with paperwork. She smiled and said if it wasn't urgent, she'd help when she got back. Dojan asked when she would finish, saying he could pick her up, but the girl thanked him and declined, knowing her husband had a lot of work. Her university studies were coming to an end. As for Sojong and Taiju, things between them were still at the flirting stage. Juju met her friend and was surprised as she didn't have classes that day. The girl said she just needed to stop by to handle something. From what she told Juju, she and Taiju had a talk about their relationship. They both liked each other. Taiju asked Sojong to give him some time to get his business going. Then he would formally introduce himself, hand her his business card, and they would start officially dating. Juju thought it sounded strange, but Sojong agreed. Juju believed that was truly noble of her. No one else would stay single just to wait for her brother. This was Juju's graduation year, so her mind was occupied with thoughts about writing her thesis. Her classes ended quite late, and she walked down the street trying to warm her frozen hands. Suddenly, she heard a familiar and dear voice calling her name. Dojan was standing, leaning against a car. He was wearing a suit and coat, tall and incredibly handsome. The girl was very surprised to see him and was thrilled that he hadn't listened to her and came to pick her up anyway. She ran into his arms, hugging him joyfully and asking why he came. Then she looked at him with concern and said he should have gotten some rest now that work was done. He'd looked so tired lately. He smiled and said that just looking at his beloved was rest enough for him. Then he asked if she was cold, and Juju said she was so cold she thought the world was ending. Dojan opened his coat, pulled her close to his chest, wrapped her in it, and said that in that case, he had to save the world for her. She rubbed her cheek happily against his chest and declared that the end of the world was officially canceled. He suddenly asked if she wanted to work with him after graduation, but Juju felt something under her hands and asked if he was wearing that harness again. She decided to check if he really had on that thing she liked so much on his broad chest. Dojan slightly lifted his shirt and, with a sly smile, said that if she agreed to work at his company, he'd wear it every day. Encouraged, the girl agreed and asked if that meant she should call him her boss now. The guy chuckled. Juju said she wanted to be alone with him as soon as possible and asked if they should book a room since Taiu was wandering around at home. Dojan liked the idea, picked her up over his shoulder, and smiled happily. She was just as happy and shouted playfully that her boss was the best. Sometime later, Juju lay there, breathing heavily and feeling completely exhausted. She tried to push Dojan away, telling him to stop teasing her like that. She had no strength left. At that moment, his phone rang. He answered and listened carefully for a few minutes, just nodding. Then he said he would pass the message to Juju. The girl, worried, asked if everything was okay. Had something happened for a call to come in this late? Dojan turned to her and asked if she remembered him telling her about the export inquiry they received for their business. Juju thought he didn't look happy and said she remembered he'd been so worried that he said if it didn't work out, they wouldn't get investments. Dojan sat on the bed and said they had just received an email. They wanted to start working with their company immediately. The girl hugged him in relief and joyfully exclaimed that it was wonderful. The guy hugged her back and said she absolutely had to agree to work at their company. He'd be very busy and would die if they rarely saw each other. She agreed. Dojan said it would be an honor to work with her. The girl reached for his lips and whispered that he'd have to show her his muscular chest every day, thinking that after graduation, she'd have to work very hard. She kissed her husband, grateful to fate that everything in her life had turned out so well. After all, it all started with a drunken mistake. So, pulling away slightly, Juju smiled, looked into Dojan's eyes, and with a chuckle asked if they should celebrate and order some alcohol to the room. Her husband smiled and told her not to joke like that. They were both overflowing with happiness. This beautiful manga has come to an end. If something touched your heart, let me know in the comments what stood out to you the most. There are still many more romantic manga recaps on the way, so don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with me. Thank you for watching and feeling every moment together.